On the corner of Swanson and Rittner Street, over 30 years of wrestling history exists. The venue now known as the 2300 Arena, but historically as the ECW Arena, Viking Hall, and later the New Alhambra, has hosted many wrestling promotions since 1993. On November 6, 2024, NXT became the latest. But how much do you know about the famous venue's history? In this video, we're mostly going to look at its time known as Viking Hall. That's the ECW years and the immediate follow-up to that promotion's closure. If you learn anything new from this video, please consider leaving a like or letting me know with a comment. Before we begin, I just wanted to explain that we're going to skim over quite a lot of ECW history here, because I wanted to talk more just about the venue and some other promotions that ran there that we'll get to later on. Viking Hall's history with pro wrestling began with ECW's first event there on May 14th, 1993, when their former venue, the gym of Cabrini College, didn't want professional wrestling anymore after just 2 shows. ECW wasn't even close to being Extreme by then, officially changing its name in late 1994. But can you imagine if the latter-day ECW had run in a Catholic school? ECW's founder Todd Gordon, who also ran a local pawn shop in the area day to day, said in an interview with Kayfabe Commentaries, filmed inside the actual building, that Johnny Hotbody, a wrestler on his roster, knew a guy who owned the building and suggested it for shows. He then described reaching the main office of the building by balancing on a plank of wood, referring to it as like tightrope walking. Generally, he describes the building as a bit of a shithole. When Sean Oliver asked Todd what changes he had to make, Todd's first answer is, "Well, we had to put buckets down when the rain came in." And he also notes that as long as they paid for it, they had permission to break anything they wanted. ECW's first show at Viking Hall, the TV taping on May 14th, 93, was first aired on television on June 8th, 93. The show starts with host Jay Sully and Paulie Dangerously welcoming us to what he calls the new ECW Arena in the heart of South Philadelphia. The show would feature a handicap match with Road Warrior Hawk against the Samoan Warrior and Donnie Allen, and a 16-man battle royal to crown the first holder of the short-lived ECW Pennsylvania State Championship. In the main event of the first episode, a rather different-looking Sandman would fail to defeat Don Morocco for the ECW heavyweight title. Speaking of Sandman, here's a trivia note for you. The Sandman wasn't just in the first televised main event from the ECW arena. He was also part of the final ECW match to take place in the ECW arena. At Holiday Hell on December 23, 2000, Steve Corino would retain the ECW World title against Sandman, but also Just Incredible. Though a different physical belt, that's the same championship that the Sandman fought for in both matches. Throughout the time that ECW ran in the building, it was more known outside wrestling as Viking Hall. This is because the building was also used by the South Philadelphia Vikings Club. They're a group of mummers, and not, as I had assumed, some kind of sports team. According to Bob McGee of Pro Wrestling Between the Sheets, a frequent attendee of the ECW arena while the promotion ran, the Viking Club did late-night bingo there to fund their group, which is where the venue sometimes gets its derogatory name as a bingo hall. Another wrestling connection comes later in the 90s, where Al Snow, frustrated by his career and looking for a new gimmick, would find a styrofoam head on a Mummer's Day parade float that was being stored in Viking Hall. This would become the initial inspiration for Head. Now it says in my script here, plug Al Snow video that's on this channel. Okay, here you go. Almost all of early ECW's most memorable moments occurred in the ECW arena, but by the time the promotion folded, it had other notable venues, like Elks Lodge in Queens, New York, and the Hammerstein Ballroom. In 2000, ECW ran at least one show in 20 different states, and even visited Canada. Unfortunately, Lance Storm had left for WCW by that point, or maybe fortunately, as the shows were in Mississauga, and not in his beloved Calgary, dramatic pause, Alberta, Canada. Among many of ECW's biggest moments in Viking Hall, Barely Legal, their first pay-per-view, occurred there. On that night, the generator for the building only just lasted through the event, and moments after the pay-per-view broadcast ended, with Terry Funk celebrating his ECW title victory, the power for the whole building went out. Fortunately, since the building's renovations years later, this hasn't happened since, and many more pay-per-view events have been held there. Other noteworthy events from the ECW arena include the 1994 NWA World Title Tournament, which ended with new champion Shane Douglas throwing down the belt and proclaiming himself the new Extreme Championship Wrestling World Champion. The building hosted all kinds of wrestling over the years, such as Lucha Libre, with the likes of Rey Mysterio Jr., Juventud Guerrera and Psychosis among others. Then, later on in '97, the infamously gory barbed wire ropes match between Terry Funk and Sabu at Born to be Wired. From May 1993, for 6 years, ECW was the only promotion that regularly ran Viking Hall. But on May 15, 1999, a show featuring talent representing 13 indie companies was held. The event was called Break the Barrier, and had talent representing, among many others, ECW, CZW, and NWA New Jersey. The idea of an NWA promotion being represented in the ECW arena is pretty funny in itself, given that it's the same building where Shane Douglas denounced the NWA. According to the Wrestling Observer, in the week after the event, Dave Meltzer reported that there were approximately 400 fans and about 300 paid at the show. The event was put on largely by Al Isaacs of the website Scoops Wrestling, and it took place just 24 hours before ECW's Hardcore Heaven pay-per-view. Despite ECW's show taking place in Poughkeepsie, New York, the indie show ended up having serious ramifications for the next night. On Break the Barrier, Shane Douglas, who as I mentioned before was no stranger to controversy in that building, cut a scathing promo on ECW, in which he essentially quit the company and would no-show the pay-per-view. This could well have been the last time Shane Douglas was in the ECW arena until about 2005, when he promoted Hardcore Homecoming, an ECW reunion show to rival WWE's One Night Stand event on the same weekend. As far as matches on the card, out of the 13 on the night, 8 of which went under 10 minutes, and 10 were for championships. In the opening match on the card, presented by Steel City Wrestling, Mike Quackenbush would defeat Don Montoya and Lou Marconi to be crowned the inaugural, and what would turn out to be the only ever SCW Lord of the Dance champion. I couldn't find a ton of information about this championship, other than Mike held it until the promotion closed in the following year, and that he seemed to have defended it only once. While the name initially sounds a bit odd, it seems the title was designed to be only defended in 3-way dance matches. How fitting then that the only champion was crowned in the ECW arena, the match type made famous in that building on the night the line was crossed. A 3-way dance, by the way, is not to be confused with the more famously named Triple Threat match, as the latter is one fall to a finish, whereas the ECW version was usually held under elimination rules. Mike Quackenbush was fairly young in his career, having debuted in 1995. He would go on to wrestle all over the world, and also found his own promotion and school, Chikara Pro and the Wrestle Factory respectively. His performance on this night was seen as somewhat of a breakout for the young Quackenbush. If you're wondering why all these images I'm using look like they've been through a washing machine, according to an article I found on Cage Side Seats, Isaacs hired, quote, 2 horrible videographers to film the show. Thus no official release was ever possible. There is a more or less full version of the show on YouTube, but its quality is rubbish even for late 90s indie standards. Combat Zone Wrestling's offering would be Nick Gage defeating his brother Justice Payne for another newly created championship, the CZW Interpromotional Hardcore title. This title, again, has little information about it online. However, Nick held it for just 2 weeks before losing it to Lobo, who was the only other champion. Other notable names that wrestled on that show include Stevie Richards, who won the Allied Powers Wrestling Federation heavyweight title. According to Richards in a 2013 interview with WrestleCrap, he was at the time considering hanging up his wrestling boots, having had a run in WCW and a brief return to ECW. Not long after this event, he would get the call to join WWE, prolonging his career by several more years. Also of note, an active WWE star seemed to appear on the card. Get ready now, this'll be a shock. It was Headbanger Mosh. Despite being signed to WWE as best I can tell, he wrestled for a few different indies throughout early '99 and a few NWA promotions. He worked as a singles wrestler as his tag team partner Headbanger Thrasher was out with an injury. At Break the Barrier, he would defend his Maryland Championship Wrestling heavyweight title, and a couple of weeks later, he would resurface on the May 25th, 1999 Raw as Beaver Cleavage, but the less said about that the better. Before I get into life for the building after ECW, there was one more very different promotion that ran Viking Hall before Break the Barrier did. In 1998, Lenwood Hamilton, a former football player and wrestler under the name Hard Rock Hamilton, started a promotion called Soul City Wrestling. Perhaps as a direct response to the Attitude Era, Hamilton promoted his show as family-friendly, even in the House of Hardcore. According to an article from the Philadelphia Inquirer after the event, his idea was to establish what he calls the first minority-owned wrestling federation in the country, and bring back the golden age of wrestling, rather than staging bloody contests where guys use foul language and bang each other over the head with chairs. There isn't a lot of information out there about Soul City Wrestling, nor Hamilton's in-ring career. However, he is slightly more famous for suing the makers of Gears of War, claiming that their character, Augustus Cole, bared a striking resemblance to him and his background in football and wrestling. One final tidbit about Soul City Wrestling though comes from an Instagram account that Hamilton appears to be involved with. It shows some video clips of a young pre-WWE Matt Hardy and a pre-ECW Steve Corino working for the promotion. Post-ECW, other local companies such as Jersey All Pro Wrestling and CZW would run the venue. In 2002, 3PW, Propane Pro Wrestling, would be founded by ECW alumni the Blue Meanie and Jasmine St. Clair, and they too would run there until an outside force would take over. XPW, owned by Rob Black, a company formed, in short, because of bad blood between he and Paul Heyman. XPW saw an opportunity to stake their claim on ECW's most famous venue. On October 5th, 2002, XPW signed an exclusive lease to the building, which would have begun in 2003 and run for 3 years. This meant that no other wrestling companies could run there. However, they were open to booking other events in the space. According to the press release that was put out at the time that you're seeing on screen right now, XPW even brought in their own people to run the venue and renamed it unofficially the XPW Arena, which can't have gone down well with the ECW faithful. In March 2003, the building's owners would end the lease due to XPW not paying the rent. Their exclusive lease ended up lasting just 2 months, with CZW being the first promotion allowed back into Viking Hall on March 8th of that year. The 2300 Arena of today is very much a different place within the same walls of the world's most famous bingo hall. Since its ECW days, many more promotions have run the building for house shows, DVD releases, television and even pay-per-views. Most recently, the NWA held its 76th anniversary event there, and next it's NXT's turn. Thank you for watching yet another wrestling channel. If you enjoyed this, please comment, like or subscribe.